Good afternoon. We'd like to begin. We're talking about the cognitive campaign, Gaza as a case study. We wanted to discuss it because in the last few years we see that there's a lot of activity in the impact or the capability to obtain impact. And we wanted to see how the events in Gaza, which are mostly part of this impact zone, how they're reflected in this process. This study evening, we're going to look at a few case study. We'll talk about some data of the media by the IDF spokesman, how things looked until now in Israel. We're going to discuss with media people how things look in the Arab world and the Israeli world in Gaza, and try to learn how things look and have been looking in Gaza. And after that, we're going to look at things with the eyes of Hamas through a conversation that will be held by my colleague, Gabi Michael, with Shlomi Ildar, who is at the moment in the United States. And finally, we're going to hold a panel in order to see how should the state conduct vis-à-vis those challenges. And finally, this study evening will be summarized. This is the plan. First of all, I'd like to welcome Ori Ganani and the whole group that's watching us at the moment from Upper Galilee. Good afternoon to them as well. And I want to say thank you to Gabi Michael, who together organized with me this study evening. Of course, Gal Perry, who worked tirelessly so things would be proper. And without Gabi, Pinchas, of course, he organizes everything the way it should be done. I'd like to call upon Rani to present the data of the media. Applause before, after. A hand of applause is in order. Good afternoon. In the 15 minutes I have, I'm going to present the data of the media that were created by the Yifat company. I am in charge in the IDF as a spokesman. First of all, the first slide, when we look at the issues in the Israeli media, what are the most salient issues when we look from the end of March until the mid-June? First of all, we see the impact of the issues that are professional and also the conflicts in the Gaza Strip. And look, if we talk about other issues like the Eurovision that was covering the media, and look at the proportion between that and when we look about the extent of exposure, if we had to buy with money the publication areas, we come to sums like 200 million shekel and tens of millions of exposures in the media. When we look at the trend of threats, what kind of threats are perceived by the media and receive a large share of the media. And here we see that, first of all, in general, if we look from January to the present, we see an increase in the last few months in the perception of the threats, discussion of threats in Israeli media. And then we also see that the Iranian issue and the Hamas are also perceived as very threatful. As for the terror organizations who act in the Gaza Strip, so here we have data which are not surprising. Here, what is very salient is the Hamas leading the discourse and the Palestinian Jihad, and the others are small events here and there. When we look at the events that usually we meet on Fridays, and we look at the time axis, we actually see peaks that we see in the beginning of the events, around the Earth Day events, and there was a large discourse, the first 20 casualties in that weekend. And we see also that the battle day that had to do with the shooting towards Israel, that's also quite obvious. And also the events where some 60 Palestinians were killed on the Nakba day that time. These are actually the most important events, and still we see the discourse all along. When we look at the social media, we see a different kind of behavior. Here we see that most of the discourse is held with people that see something visual. If you see a video with a sniper and things of that sort, there's more awareness, but there's no real comparability between what's happening in the regular media and the social one. Under the headline, "This is what's left," we see the main events, and here we add another layer, and you see the colors. We're talking about the sentiment. That means were these events covered in a positive manner, or objective, or negative? We see the green reflects the positive and neutral and gray perception, and the red, which is negative, is almost not there in the regular coverage of the events. Only if there was some infiltrations of Palestinians into Israel, and also that sniper video. But all in all, what we see in the discourse, we see that most of it was neutral or positive. In the social media, when we look at what's happening there too we see that the negative aspect or the negative sentiment in the Israeli public is low. What was obvious, we see again those videos, and from the scope of discourse, they were at the center. The media deals with the campaigns, but the social media more with the videos. All in all, when we look at the nature of publications, if they talk about defense, how we perceived, or the Israeli activity is perceived as defense, here we identified that there's some sort of an advantage to the defense aspect, but all in all, it's quite balanced. We see the defense 4% and the attack, the offensive is 6%, so basically it's rather the same. Another interesting data, where do we get actually the information? Who creates the information in the traditional media as well as the social one? In the regular media, as opposed to what we could assume, the military reporters, they're very dominant and they're responsible to about half of the publications. The other infos are political reporters, Arab reporters, local ones. All in all, it compels us as the IDF spokesman to work with a great variety of reporters, not just military ones. So only half of them have an impact. When we look at the social media in Israel, in order to know where is the discourse, here, not surprisingly, Facebook and Twitter, and these are platforms that really serves those media people. Bottom line of what we saw, the IDF, as far as media in the last 3 months, has a few arenas, a few events. We spoke about Iran and other arenas. All in all, the scope of exposure, when we measure it, the scope, we come to peak data. Most of them are either positive for us or neutral. The security threats on Israel is a peak of a few years. When we look at the last 3 years, the traditional media leads the discourse, and more than half of the reports in the media derive not from military sources. It's usually from defense, not so much of offense. And the last data, the sources of information may make it difficult on controlling the message. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Just want to say a little bit about this data, and in general, we can see that the web is really gaining momentum, and that's what can be manipulated and is being manipulated far more than, let's say, the traditional manipulations in the traditional media. But the web is certainly very strong and provides a huge platform for such cognitive campaigns. Both on the defensive it can be used and also on the offensive. And a little bit about our expectations from this cognitive world. The events in Gaza, the thought, the parameters by which we measure success, whether we're okay, whether the Israeli position was actually present and was prominent, we must remember that the events in Gaza were very strong and powerful, and we have a certain expectation that following such events, the ambassador in Berlin or the ambassador in Turkey will be summoned, and that shouldn't be our expectation, because the potential of the damage of these events is huge, and in practice when we look at it we see less than what we expected, and I think we'll be talking about that in the next panel. I see that Ron is here, is Joe here, and Michal, everyone's here? Okay, excellent. So I will now ask Michal to the podium to hold this panel and to look at these events through the different media prisms. And again, applause, please.